Welcome to Sports Spectrum, the sports and faith podcast that brings Jesus back into the conversation. Here's your host, Jason Romano.
What's up, guys? Welcome to the show. I am Jason. This is Sports Spectrum. My email address, jason@sportspectrum.com. If you'd like to reach me directly with any guest ideas or topics or stories that we should be covering here at Sports Spectrum, you can email me, jason@sportspectrum.com. And today on the show, we have Mark Batterson returning, a New York Times bestselling author. He was on the show back in November of 2019. He now returns with a brand new book. It's called Win the Day, 7 Daily Habits to Help You Stress Less and Accomplish More. Mark's one of my favorite guys, one of my favorite guests that we've had on the show. He's the lead pastor of National Community Church in Washington, D.C., one church in 7 locations. And his church also owns and operates Ebenezer's Coffee House, the Miracle Theater, and the D.C. Dream Center, which has served more than 15,000 meals to the homeless since the pandemic began. As I mentioned, Mark is a New York Times bestselling author of 20 books, including his latest, Win the Day. This is a great conversation. Mark is very connected in the sports world, and we have some stories here, specifically from some guys, including Buzz Williams, Texas A&M's men's basketball coach, and the all-time leading rusher in NFL history, Emmitt Smith. Take a listen to our conversation with Mark Batterson in the new book, Win the Day, joining us here today on Sports Spectrum. Pastor Mark, how are you, sir?
Hey, doing great, Jason. Good to be back.
It's good to have you back on the show. And I think it was November of 19 that we actually talked and had our interview release on the podcast the first time. So let me start with November 2020, which would have been a year later. And I'm reading on Instagram, following you a little bit, go do some research and realize that you ran a half marathon. And I've run a 5K, and that was hard for me. And I don't enjoy running, and I like to walk now. I'm 47. I know you're a little bit older than me. I'm 47. I don't like running, Mark. And you ran. So why in the world would you subject yourself to a half marathon?
I like pain, Jason. I'm a former college athlete. And by the way, the older you get, the better you were.
Yes, I appreciate that.
Just for the record, I was a first-team All-American. And then I kind of paused right there a little bit, Jason. NCAA. And so my street cred just went way down. But I played a little bit of basketball back in the day, have a couple of ACL reconstructions to show for it. Mm-hmm. But I love staying in shape. And I always try to have kind of an annual challenge. And so this year, running that half marathon. This year, it's biking a century. So I'll do a 100-mile bike race. And it's just it's a way to stay in shape these days.
But why don't you just go for walks? Like you want to challenge yourself, apparently, huh?
I really do think it goes back to running wind sprints, where the coach will push you until, let's just say, you lose your lunch. Yes. It's built into me. And I'm also a type 3 performer or achiever on the Enneagram. And so I like pushing out of my comfort zone. And listen, I mean, let's be honest. I also like surfing the couch occasionally. Okay. But I like a good physical challenge.
What was that half marathon experience like?
Well, I mean, it was, I had pulled a calf about a month earlier. The injuries come more frequently these days.
Sure.
In fact, here's the backstory, Jason. I grew up in Chicago when Jordan was playing for the Bulls. So as you can imagine, when The Last Dance came out,
oh my gosh,
I was glued. I mean, I was waiting for every episode. I got so fired up one night that, as you mentioned, I'm a little bit older than you. There might even be a 5 in front of my age.
Okay.
But I was like so fired up, and I'm still 29 in my brain.
Right.
And so I challenged my kids to a race. And we went out the next day, and it had nothing to do with The Last Dance. It just got the competitive juices going. We go out and do a little 40-yard dash, and let's say I only made it about 20 yards, and my calf gave me a nice little pull. And so I still the body, the mind is willing, but the body is weak, I guess, at this point.
Yeah, I used to play basketball, pickup. I mean, I played with a bunch of guys when I was working at ESPN. We would play. Then I hit 40, and right about 40, the next day after I would play, and these guys were probably, most of them were younger than me. Maybe there was a few that were older. I felt like a train had run over me. And I said, you know what? I love basketball, but I also love not being in pain. So I stopped. And it's 47 now. Like I said, I go for walks and I watch The Last Dance, Mark. That's what I do.
I love it. I love it. We're cut from the same cloth.
Absolutely. Mark Batterson's our guest here on Sports Spectrum, the new book, Win the Day, 7 Daily Habits to Help You Stress Less and Accomplish More. Let's talk about that book. This is your 20th book. Am I right on that? Number 20?
This is number 20.
Tell us about it. Why did you decide to write this book?
Yeah, I think this one is about all of us fall into the trap of trying to control outcomes, but you got to focus on inputs. And you have to mentally find a way to reverse engineer those life goals into daily habits. And then, the driving question of the book is, can you do it for a day? And you can fill in the blank with anything, Jason. Can you do your age in sit-ups today? Can you write down a gratitude today? Fill in the blank with any habit. Anybody can do anything for a day. And so what I'm really trying to do is help people, establish these habits in their life that are going to produce the outcome that they want. And I think this is a moment, especially after a COVID crisis and the craziness of everything that's happened over the last year. It's a good moment to hit the reset and just go back to basics and win the day. Do it one day at a time. And then before you know it, you have a winning streak and you're a lot closer to some of those goals that you set than where you began.
What's one of the habits that you've worked into your life recently that you say, okay, I had to do this. It's a daily habit and now it's helping me out?
Well, I went back to the old school gratitude journal because there's so much racial tension, political polarization. There's so many things happening in culture. And I think it's fair for me to say a lot of negativity as well.
Absolutely.
Like, it's hard to stay positive and to stay in your lane and to stay the course. And I was kind of falling into some of those social media algorithms and I just had to go back to basics. And so it's interesting. The very first habit, of course, is flip the script. And we think about habits as being these external habits that maybe increase productivity and proficiency, practicing scales or practicing skills. But Jason, you and I both know it's the internal, it's the mental habits that are most critical. And so I've gone back to that place of just making sure that I'm experiencing gratitude every day so that I'm functioning out of a place of positivity.
So you mentioned, obviously, there's 7 daily habits. It's on the back of the book, so I could mention them all. Flip the script, kiss the wave, eat the frog, fly the kite, cut the rope, wind the clock, and see the clouds. Now, we could go into all of these because they're all awesome, but we want people to buy the book and read about all of these different 7 daily habits. So let's talk about one, and I'm not going to pick the one. I'll have you pick which one, but I want to ask it to you as it relates to the sports audience that we have. Which of the habits do you think relates most to a sports audience, to a coach, to an athlete, to, even just sports fans? Which of these habits do you think kind of relates into that world?
Yeah, to me, it's habit number 3, eat the frog. It's this idea that if you want God to do the super, you have to do the natural. And that's kind of my language. But, Mark Twain said, if you ever have to eat a live frog, do it first thing in the morning. Then you'll know that the hardest thing is behind you, which is hilarious because I can't imagine that scenario.
Right.
But so let me go Rowdy Gaines. I bet that name rings a bell for some people. I have a chapter called The Mundanity of Excellence. And I share a little bit of his story, Jason. He now announces the Olympic Games, but some of your listeners are old enough to remember him as actually a gold medalist. So when we boycotted, do you remember this? We boycotted the Moscow Games. I think it was in '80. So long story short,
yeah,
Rowdy Gaines trained 8 years for a race that would last 1 minute.
Oh,
Just stop and think about that. Like the level of discipline. And so he once calculated that he had swam 20,000 miles in 50-meter increments. In other words, as he put it, I swam around the world for a race that lasted 49 seconds.
Oh, my gosh.
And what I love about that, Jason, is it's the athletes who are listening and the coaches who are listening. Those are the only people who get that, and that makes sense to them, because we go after these goals and we're willing to make tremendous sacrifices. We're willing to eat the frog for 8 years for that 49 seconds of trying to be the best in the world. And so I certainly share and kind of break down some ideas in terms of how do you eat the frog every single day in a way that you're going to experience that cumulative effect. In fact, just one more thought. Albert Einstein said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. We tend to think finances, but I think it has a lot more to do with habits. The compound interest of habits is where the payoff is, especially in the world of athletics.
Mark Batterson is our guest here on Sports Spectrum, New York Times best-selling author. The new book is called Win the Day. You'll like this. Ryan Saunders from the Minnesota Timberwolves, he's their head coach, had this to say about the book. He says, "Win the Day is a timely guide to stressing less in a world that gives us more than enough to stress about. Mark Batterson gives you 7 practical steps to living boldly, accomplishing more, and seizing hold of God-sized dreams." It has to be pretty cool to see people like Coach Saunders in the sports space reading your books and you being connected with a guy like Ryan Saunders. Tell us about Ryan and the relationship you guys have.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, it's interesting. I was talking with Ryan and I discovered that his dad, of course, Flip Saunders, is kind of a coach of coaches.
Yeah, sure.
To say the least. Come to find out, one of his mantras was win the day. And so I think it was really a little extra meaningful for Ryan to be able to kind of, it's a message he had heard really his entire life. And so, Jason, you know this, one of the great joys for me, by day I pastor a church here in D.C., but, I do a lot of chapels for NFL, NBA,
Sure.
MLB, and I love kind of interfacing with professional athletes because, maybe it's because I vicariously lived through them. I wanted to be one of them, but no, my career ended at the collegiate level. It's interesting because win the day, it's not really a brand new phrase. In fact, I was surprised there weren't like 36 books with that title, because it is a mantra in a lot of locker rooms. Mm-hmm. And I just feel like it's a message that resonates really well in some of those professional sports and collegiate sports circles. And that's exciting to me. I think that the best coaches, the best athletes, they try to go 1-0 every day.
Every day. And it's funny you mention that, because as I'm reading through the book, and I haven't read the whole thing, but you skim through it, you go through it quickly. And I recognized a very famous NFL player, the NFL's all-time leading rusher, and the guy I rooted for as a Cowboys fan, Emmitt Smith. And you write a little bit about a lesson you learned from Emmitt and spending some time with him. Can you share a little bit about that time with Emmitt?
Yeah, pretty fun. We were on a panel together. And so I was like, what am I doing on this panel with Emmitt Smith? But he shared about his 24-hour rule, which I love. And this idea that you can lament the loss or celebrate the victory for 24 hours. Give yourself 24 hours. But guess what? Then it's right back to business. And Jason, I did the math. It's over 10 miles. He rushed for more than 10 miles. And the way I like saying it, that's with the 300-pound defensive lineman giving him a flat tire every 4.2 yards. So
seriously,
pretty impressive. And so if I zoom back out, if it's okay to kind of put my pastor hat on,
please.
I might just make this observation that give us this day our daily bread. That probably sounds familiar, even if you don't have kind of a faith matrix. It's the Lord's Prayer. And there's a psalm that says, "This is the day that the Lord has made." There's a verse in Lamentations, "His mercies are new every morning." A verse in Ephesians, "Don't let the sun go down on your anger." Jesus himself said, "Don't worry about tomorrow." And so this idea of living in daytime compartments or just win the day is something that I think is more than just a good message. I think it's a God message. It's really the way that we're designed. There's a certain rhythm to life. And if you live in the wrong time zone, if you're stuck in yesterday or you're too worried about tomorrow, you're not going to fully maximize the day that's been given to you as a gift. And so that 24-hour rule from Emmitt kind of resonates even in a spiritual sense.
Yeah, I call it blooming where you're planted, right? It's the same thing, like where you are that day, that moment. Don't think about yesterday. Don't think about tomorrow. Just be where you are, be present, and be right connected with the Lord.
Yeah. And Jason, can I share one other thing?
Absolutely.
You know, I just think this would be really meaningful to your listeners. You know, I've been friends with Buzz Williams, now the coach at Texas A&M, for a number of years. I met him when he was at Marquette, but you know, I did a pregame for them when they played the Sweet 16 a couple of years ago, the Virginia Tech Hokies against the Duke Blue Devils, and I'm gonna share something that, man, it impacted me. Before I share it, let me say this: if you want every day to count every day. In other words, really have this daily mindset. Jason, he let me kind of sit in on their film study as well as some of his kind of coaching. And I'll never forget this. He mentioned to the players that it was day 1,811 as his coach of the Virginia Tech Hokies. Okay, hold on, time out. Who knows how many days, literally the number of days that they've been in their current job. Like, I mean, that is remarkable. I'll tell you someone who's making every day count. And that's kind of a fun story. By the way, their mantra as a team that year was #GetBetter. And if you want to get better, you have to take that win the day kind of approach to whatever it is that you're doing.
Let's take a quick break to tell you about our brand new partners and sponsors here at Sports Spectrum, our friends at Convoy of Hope. They are a faith-based nonprofit organization with a driving passion to feed the world through the children's feeding initiatives, community outreaches, and disaster responses. In the United States and throughout the world right now, countless families are living on the fringe or have fallen into the depths of poverty and suffering. And right now, we need you to join and come be a part of the starting lineup. See, your favorite players and teams are partnering right now with Convoy of Hope to fight hunger, poverty, and suffering in the United States and throughout the world. In doing so, you can advocate, give, network, and volunteer to help ensure that those in need receive hot meals, groceries, haircuts, health and dental screenings, family portraits, socks, shoes, clothing, school supplies, hygiene kits, and much more. To learn more and be a part of the great work Convoy of Hope is doing, you can visit them now at convoynation.com, CONVOY nation.com. He's Mark Batterson. You heard the book, Win the Day. Go out and get it. It's available everywhere books are found. All right, I want to ask you a sports question here. I know you're a big sports fan. You're not just working with people in sports, but you're also a fan. So if you had a DeLorean and it's Marty McFly Back to the Future, Doc Brown type of world that you're living in, right? And you could go to any sporting event, whether it's past. I mean, we talk about not looking back in the past or looking to the future. But for this, we'll just have some fun here. And you could go to any sports event, game, whatever it is, at your point in your life, wherever it was, whether it was as a kid, whether it's now, maybe it's the future. Tell me where you go. Where would you go?
I love it. Let me do a couple of honorable mention.
Okay, I like it.
If it wasn't freezing cold, maybe the Ice Bowl, right?
Yes.
At the frozen tundra at Lambeau Field. But that's a little too cold for my taste, so we'll just give that honorable mention. Mm-hmm. I've got to say, I think because we both have an affinity for that Last Dance, it might be that the flu game against the Utah Jazz when Jordan just put on a show despite being so sick.
Well, and by the way, game now, right? It's the pizza game.
And the pizza game, exactly. I was just going to say that there might have been a little food poisoning in the mix. So that may be up there. I will say, way back when the Packers played the Steelers, I think Super Bowl 45. When I knew they were going, I tweeted, "I'll preach for tickets," and wouldn't you know it, someone took me up on it, and so I actually got to live the dream. Wow. And was at Super Bowl 45. Of course, it was at the Cowboys Stadium. And so those are epic moments. And, hey, fun fact.
I like it.
Okay. I once read that the fans of losing teams experience a 20% drop in testosterone after their team loses. And by the way, I think it's probably a 20% bump after your team wins. And so I'm just saying, if there's anybody else out there that, like me, has a serious problem where it really affects you emotionally when your team wins and loses, you are not alone. You're not crazy. Scientifically, there is something happening hormonally within you. And I would just say it's better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all. That was just totally out of nowhere, but that's hopefully meaningful to someone.
Let me tell you something. As a sports fan, watching an event of my team at night, like watching a Sunday night football game or a baseball game late, a real tight game, and your team loses, you want to know how it affects you? You can't fall asleep, right, Mark? You can't fall asleep.
No.
You're trying to go to bed and you're like, I can't fall asleep right now. I'm too worked up.
No way. I wear an Oura ring, which does all these infrared measurements. My wife got it for me for my birthday. What can I say? My wife loves me, Jason.
That's good.
On the nights where my team loses, you are absolutely right. My sleep score is going to go way down.
Yeah. You want to talk about how it affects you. All you got to do, if you know how you're a sports fan, if you're trying to go to bed and you're laying there with your eyes wide open, wondering what in the world is going on. As we wind down here, Mark, I want to ask you, because I want you to put back that pastor hat on a little bit too. I just wonder what your biggest takeaway is as we look back at 2020, right? And even into early 2021. We mentioned it with COVID, the political division, the racial division, all that we've dealt with. Just wondering what your takeaway is. Maybe it's even a leadership takeaway, right? As a leader of a church and a pastor of a church and a very large church that had to, I'm sure, shut down just like everywhere else, or I should say pivot in the way that you present church. What's your takeaway when you think back now?
Yeah, I mean, I'm still trying to get clarity on it, Jason. But, I read this stat that a survey that found 18% of leaders felt qualified to lead during this season. I'll be honest, I'm wondering who those 18% are.
Seriously.
Because all of us are past our pay grade. But I will say this. I think these are the moments when leaders lead, when they stay calm and carry on, where we don't overreact to some of the things that are happening. You've got to lead out of your conviction. Otherwise, you're going to get some whiplash. And so, I think one of the big lessons learned is I fall back on this Stockdale paradox, where you confront the brutal facts with unwavering faith. And I won't share the whole context, But I think it's so critical that you can't bury your head in the sand. Listen, denial ain't just a river in Egypt. You aren't doing anybody any favors if you aren't confronting the brutal facts. But the key is you can't lose faith in the end of the story. As a leader, you have to cast vision. And so whether it's a business or a team that, let's say a team has a losing streak, how do you hit the reset? How do you flip the script? Well, one way that you do it is you cast vision again to, hey, this is who we are. This is what we're about. We've lost a couple of games. We've lost a couple of accounts, whatever it is. But you got to go back and just try to win that next one and create a little bit of a winning streak. And so really, really tough year. But those are the moments where I think we rediscover who we are. And in a sense, it forces you to innovate a little bit. And so, we have a DC Dream Center in Ward 7 that served 55,000 meals this last year.
Amazing.
We created a COVID relief fund. We gave more than $500,000 helping over 7,000 people. So these are moments, Jason, where we can still step up and step in and really make a positive difference.
So the last two questions I have, Mark, and again, you've been so generous with your time, thank you, is really about what we've seen and where we are right now as a country and as a world, right? And even as followers of Christ in the church, what are you most concerned about and what are you most hopeful for? So those will be the final two questions. Let's start with being concerned first. What is most concerning for you right now as a pastor?
Well, I think if you allow it to, culture will name you and tame you. It'll chew you up and then it'll spit you out. I think just from my vantage point, Jason, this is a Hebrews 12:27 moment. And that verse says, everything that can be shaken will be shaken so that the unshakable things remain. I think some of what's happening right now is false idols, false securities, false narratives, you name it. Those things are being shaken. And the unshakable thing to me is, guess what? God's got this. We are here for such a time as this. We are here for such a place as this. So don't lose sight of the fact that I would even say administrations come and go, but the kingdom of God is forever. And so in moments like this, this is going to sound counterintuitive, but you have to remember the future. You have to remember that this is headed somewhere that if, like me, you happen to believe the account of Scripture, it paints a pretty good picture, Jace. I mean, listen, Jesus was a realist. He said, in this world you will have trouble, but he said, don't lose heart. I have overcome the world. And so I think we live in the tension of feeling that, but we don't lose faith either.
Yeah, I think you just kind of answered what you're most hopeful for, but I'll let you get the final word here.
Well, I would just remind us that as someone who follows Christ, I feel like I'm called to be a peacemaker, a grace giver, a tone setter. I feel like I'm called to stand in the gap with humility and with courage. And, Dr. King said, we aren't called to be thermometers which reflect just the popular opinion, what's happening in culture. We're called to be thermostats. In other words, we change the temperature, we shift the atmosphere. And I'm being reminded of that these days, that let's make sure that we're taking our cues from Scripture, from the Holy Spirit. And when we do that, I think we can really make a significant difference.
I love that. He is Mark Batterson. He's the New York Times bestselling author, the pastor of National Community Church in Washington, D.C. We got the new book, Win the Day, right here in my hand. Want you all to go pick up a copy now. It's available everywhere books are found. Mark, thanks, my friend. Thanks for coming back on the show. Maybe we'll get together in person sometime and rewatch, we'll rewatch the Michael Jordan documentary. What do you say?
I love it. And we'll do it with a little bit of deep dish Malnati Chicago style pizza.
Oh, now you're talking, my friend. Now you're talking. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you.
Blessings.
Great stuff there from Mark Batterson, the lead pastor at National Community Church in Washington, D.C. So glad that he returned to the show. And you can go back and listen to the first episode that we had on. It was about a year and a half ago. It was November of 2019. We're now here in 2021. And this book, 7 Daily Habits to Help You Stress Less and Accomplish More, it's a game changer. It really is. Lots of sports references. He kind of alluded to that in the interview. You should go pick it up right now. It's available everywhere books are found. This was a fantastic conversation, and really appreciate Pastor Mark's heart for people. I loved what he had to say about just fixing our eyes on Jesus. Remember the future. I mean, that's remembering who Jesus is and that he's in control and that he has overcome anything that we go through in this life. So I just appreciate Pastor Mark for coming on, and I really appreciated his Buzz Williams story. That was an amazing story and just a wonderful anecdote about Coach Williams. And hopefully we can get Coach Williams on here on the podcast at some point as well and ask him specifically about counting each day and making sure that he wins each day, one day at a time. It's the cliche, but it really is true. And again, appreciate Pastor Mark for joining us here on Sports Spectrum. We appreciate you as well. Do us a favor, if you could, rate and review this podcast over at the Apple Podcast app. It helps us get the word out about the Sports Spectrum podcast. And while you're there, search the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network and look for our shows, Recalibrated and Table 40, the Football Sunday podcast. These are all podcasts that are part of Sports Spectrum's podcast family, and you can go subscribe to those right now. Tons of great conversations on the intersection of sports and faith from the sports world and even outside of the sports world as part of the Sports Spectrum Podcast Network. And then whatever app you're listening to this show on right now, make sure you subscribe. That way you never miss an episode of Sports Spectrum's podcast. We're dropping 3 to 4 shows a week, and we hope that you are encouraged. We hope you're tuning in and checking this out every time, because these stories that we have on are so just uplifting, encouraging to me, and I hope they're encouraging to you as well. We love what we get to do, bring Jesus back into the conversation. We hope you enjoy it too. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time right here on Sports Spectrum. My name is Jason Romano. I hope you all have a great rest of your day.